The ship descended slowly through the thick, swirling clouds of Kalos IV. The planet below was a chaotic mix of jagged mountains, dense jungles, and rivers that shimmered with an eerie green glow. It was a world that looked like it had been designed to kill anything that dared set foot on it. But this was exactly why the research team from Earth had come here. They were scientists, explorers, and survivors, or at least they hoped they were. Alex Carter adjusted his helmet as he stepped off the landing ramp. He glanced around, taking in the alien landscape. The air smelled strange, metallic almost, and every sound seemed louder than it should be. Birds, or something like them, screeched overhead, their cries sharp and unsettling. Behind him, Rachel Monroe double-checked the equipment strapped to her back. She wasn't thrilled about being so far from home, but she knew how important this mission was. If they could understand how life thrived here, maybe humanity could find ways to survive on other planets too. Commander Jack Hayes stood nearby, scanning the horizon with a pair of high-tech binoculars. His voice crackled over the comm system. "All right, people, let's move. We've got 2 hours before nightfall, and I don't want us setting up camp in the dark." He didn't need to explain why. Everyone had read the reports. Kalos IV was classified as a death world for good reason. It wasn't just the predators or the poisonous plants. It was the sheer unpredictability of everything. One wrong step, one moment of carelessness, and you were gone. The team moved quickly, carrying supplies toward a clearing near the edge of the jungle. Alex led the way, his eyes darting between his scanner and the ground ahead. He stopped suddenly, pointing at something half buried in the dirt. "Look at this," he said, kneeling down. It was a piece of metal, twisted and scorched, bearing markings none of them recognized. "Could be debris from another ship," Rachel suggested, crouching beside him. "Or maybe it's older than that." Before anyone could speculate further, a low rumble echoed through the trees. Everyone froze, gripping their weapons instinctively. The noise grew louder, closer, until a massive creature burst into view. It resembled a cross between a wolf and a lizard, its scales glinting in the dim light. Its eyes locked onto the group, and it let out a guttural growl. Commander Hayes raised his rifle. "Stand your ground," he barked. But the creature didn't attack. Instead, it circled them, sniffing the air cautiously. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared back into the jungle, leaving the team shaken but unharmed. "What was that?" Rachel whispered, lowering her weapon. No one answered. They didn't know. And that was the problem. This planet was full of mysteries, most of which probably wanted them dead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the terrain, the team finished setting up camp. Tents were erected, sensors deployed, and perimeter defenses activated. Inside the main tent, Alex pored over data from the day's scans, while Rachel tinkered with a malfunctioning drone. Commander Hayes sat at the edge of the camp, staring into the darkness. Something felt off, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The planet was quiet now, too quiet. Then, just as Alex was about to call it a night, the equipment picked up something unusual, a signal. Faint but steady, it pulsed like a heartbeat. "You're not going to believe this," Alex said, leaning closer to the monitor. Rachel joined him, frowning. "It's coming from the jungle," she said. "Whatever it is, it's intelligent." Hayes entered the tent, his expression grim. "We'll investigate at first light," he said firmly. "Until then, stay alert." As he left, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Somewhere out there, hidden in the depths of Kalos IV, something, or someone, was watching them. And it wasn't clear yet whether they'd be friends or foes. The next morning, the team prepared to follow the signal into the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and every breath felt heavy. Alex led the way, holding a handheld scanner that beeped softly as they moved closer to the source. Rachel stayed close behind, her eyes darting nervously at the dense foliage around them. Commander Hayes brought up the rear, his rifle ready, scanning for any signs of danger. As they ventured deeper, the jungle grew darker, the canopy above blocking out most of the sunlight. Strange noises echoed around them, clicks, growls, and rustling leaves. It was impossible to tell what was making the sounds or how close they were. "Stay sharp," Hayes muttered, his voice low but firm. No one needed to be reminded twice. After an hour of slow progress, the signal on Alex's scanner grew stronger. They pushed through a wall of vines and stopped in their tracks. In front of them stood a group of towering figures unlike anything they had ever seen. These beings were massive, their bodies covered in thick, armored skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and their movements were deliberate, almost predatory. One of them stepped forward, clearly the leader. His voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. "Who are you?" The words were broken, spoken in halting English, but the meaning was clear. Alex swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "We're explorers from Earth," he said slowly, raising his hands to show they meant no harm. "We came here to study this planet." The leader studied them for a long moment before nodding slightly. "I am Varnock," he said. "Deathworlder." He gestured to the others behind him. "You not belong here." Commander Hayes stepped forward, his posture tense but respectful. "We don't mean any trouble. We just want to understand your world." Varnock tilted his head, as if considering Hayes's words. Then he pointed toward the jungle. "If stay, prove worth. Fight." Rachel exchanged nervous glances with Alex. "Fight? What does he mean by that?" Before anyone could ask, Varnock turned and began walking deeper into the jungle, motioning for them to follow. Reluctantly, the team obeyed, unsure of what lay ahead. As they walked, Alex noticed one of the Deathworlders lingering near the back of the group. She was smaller than the others, her armor less elaborate, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. When Alex caught her eye, she gave him a small nod. Her name, he learned later, was Zira. They eventually reached a clearing where several crude structures made of stone and metal stood. Varnock turned to face them. "This? Trials," he said, pointing to the area. "Survive. Earn trust." Hayes crossed his arms. "What kind of trials?" Varnock didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured for one of his warriors to step forward. The warrior pulled out a long blade and swung it effortlessly, cutting through a nearby tree trunk as if it were butter. The message was clear. Survival on Kalos IV required strength, skill, and resilience. Alex took a deep breath. "We'll do it," he said, surprising even himself. Hayes shot him a warning look, but Alex pressed on. "If we can prove ourselves, maybe we can learn from each other." Varnock studied Alex for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow, begin." That night, back at camp, tensions ran high. Kyle Bennett, the youngest member of the team, paced anxiously. "Are we insane? These things could kill us." He snapped, gripping his weapon tightly. "We don't have a choice," Rachel said firmly. "If we refuse, they might see us as weak and attack anyway. At least this way, we have a chance." Hayes agreed. "She's right. But everyone needs to focus. One mistake out there, and we're done." As the team settled in for the night, Alex couldn't stop thinking about Zira. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way she watched them, not with hostility but curiosity. Whatever it was, Alex hoped it meant they still had a fighting chance. The next morning, the team woke early, their nerves stretched tight like bowstrings. The Deathworlders were waiting for them at the edge of the clearing, their towering forms casting long shadows in the pale light. Varnock stood at the center, his glowing eyes fixed on the humans. "First trial," he said, his deep voice rumbling through the air. He pointed to a narrow path that led into the jungle. "Go. Survive." Commander Hayes nodded sharply, signaling for the team to move forward. Alex took the lead, clutching the scanner tightly in one hand while keeping the other near his weapon. Rachel followed closely, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Kyle brought up the rear, his face pale but determined. The path twisted and turned, narrowing as they went deeper into the jungle. The sounds of wildlife grew louder. Snarls, hisses, and the occasional crash of something large moving through the underbrush. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them shifted. Alex stumbled as the earth gave way, and he barely managed to grab onto a root sticking out of the dirt. Below him was a deep pit filled with jagged spikes. "Help!" Alex shouted, his voice trembling. Rachel dropped to her knees and reached out, grabbing his wrist just in time. With Hayes and Kyle's help, they pulled him back to solid ground. Everyone was breathing hard, their hearts racing. "That was close," Rachel muttered, brushing dirt off her hands. "Too close." They pressed on, more cautious now. Soon, they reached a wide river blocking their path. The water looked calm, but Alex knew better than to trust appearances on this planet. He scanned the area and spotted a fallen tree spanning the river. "We can cross here," he said, pointing. As they started crossing, the tree groaned under their weight. Halfway across, Kyle slipped, letting out a startled yell as he fell into the water. Instantly, the calm surface erupted into chaos. A massive creature with rows of teeth lunged out of the water, its jaws snapping shut inches from Kyle's head. Rachel reacted quickly, firing a grappling hook from her belt and pulling Kyle to safety just in time. The creature thrashed angrily before disappearing back into the depths. Back on solid ground, Kyle collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. "I almost died," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Hayes crouched beside him, his expression unreadable. "You're alive. That's what matters. But you need to focus if we're going to make it through this." The final challenge of the day came as they approached a steep cliff. At the top, Zira waited, watching silently. She gestured for them to climb. The rocks were slick with moss, making every step treacherous. Rachel moved carefully, testing each foothold before putting her full weight on it. Alex followed, his muscles burning with effort. Kyle hesitated, fear written all over his face. "You can do it," Rachel called down to him. "Just take it slow." Kyle nodded and began climbing, but halfway up, his foot slipped. For a moment, he dangled precariously, clinging to the rock with one hand. Panic set in, and he froze. "I can't," he cried. "Yes, you can," Hayes shouted from above. "Reach for the next hold." Summoning every ounce of courage, Kyle stretched his arm and grabbed onto a sturdy ledge. Slowly, he pulled himself up until he reached the top. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the ground, tears streaming down his face. Zira knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Kyle wiped his eyes and nodded weakly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Varnock appeared, flanked by other Deathworlders. He studied the humans, his expression unreadable. "You survive," he said finally, "but trials, not over." Alex glanced at his teammates, seeing the exhaustion etched on their faces. They had made it through the first day, but he knew the worst was yet to come. Still, there was a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could prove themselves worthy of the Deathworlders' respect. The days that followed were a blur of challenges, each one more grueling than the last. The humans quickly learned that the trials weren't just about physical strength. They tested intelligence, teamwork, and even patience. Alex found himself spending more time with Zira, who often accompanied them during certain tasks. She didn't speak much, but her actions spoke volumes. When Alex struggled to repair a damaged sensor in the middle of a dense thicket, Zira handed him tools without being asked, her movements precise and efficient. Rachel, too, began to bond with the Deathworlders, especially after a particularly harrowing trial. They had been tasked with retrieving an object from a cave filled with venomous creatures. Rachel used her engineering skills to rig up a makeshift trap, diverting the creatures away from their path. One of the Deathworlders, A warrior named Tark nodded approvingly as they exited the cave. "Clever," he said, his voice rough but respectful. It was the first compliment any of them had received, and Rachel felt a small surge of pride despite her exhaustion. Kyle, however, continued to struggle. His earlier bravery during the river crossing seemed like a distant memory now. During one trial, he froze when confronted by a pack of snarling predators, forcing Hayes and Alex to step in and drive the creatures away. The Deathworlders watched silently, their expressions unreadable. Later, Varnock pulled Kyle aside. "Fear, weakness," he said bluntly. Kyle looked down, shame washing over him. "I'm trying," he muttered. Varnock's gaze softened slightly. "Try harder." Despite the tension, moments of connection began to emerge. Around the campfire at night, the Deathworlders shared stories of their battles against Cataly's deadliest creatures. Alex listened intently, fascinated by how their culture celebrated resilience and adaptability. Inspired, he decided to share a story of his own, one about humanity's fight to survive on Earth during times of crisis. Zira leaned forward, her glowing eyes fixed on Alex as he spoke. When he finished, she nodded slowly, as if understanding something deeper about these strange beings from another world. Commander Hayes noticed the growing camaraderie but remained cautious. He reminded the team daily that trust was fragile here. "We're still outsiders," he warned. "Don't let your guard down." But even Hayes couldn't deny the change in the air. The Deathworlders were watching them differently now, not just as intruders, but as potential allies. One evening, after a long day of trials, Rachel sat beside Zira, tinkering with a broken device she had found earlier. Zira watched curiously, occasionally pointing to parts or mimicking gestures to ask questions. By the end of the hour, they had repaired it together. Rachel grinned, holding up the now functional gadget. "Teamwork," she said, tapping her chest, and then Zira's. Zira returned the smile, a rare and striking expression on her otherwise stoic face. But not all progress came easily. During a trial involving a race through a labyrinth of tunnels, Kyle once again faltered. He tripped over a root and twisted his ankle, slowing the entire group down. Hayes helped him limp to the finish line, frustration evident in his clenched jaw. "We can't afford mistakes like this," he snapped later, back at camp. Kyle hung his head, guilt written across his face. "I know," he whispered. "I'll do better." Alex stepped in, placing a hand on Kyle's shoulder. "You've already done better than you think," he said firmly. "Remember the river. You didn't give up then, and you shouldn't now." As the days wore on, the humans realized that the trials weren't just about proving themselves to the Deathworlders. They were also learning what it meant to truly endure. Each challenge pushed them closer to their limits, but it also brought them closer to understanding the harsh beauty of Kalos IV and the people who called it home. For the first time since arriving, they began to believe they might actually make it through. The fifth day of the trials began with an unsettling calm. The jungle seemed quieter than usual, the air heavy and still. Varnock appeared early, his expression more serious than ever. "New trial," he said, pointing toward the dense forest. "Danger greater." The team exchanged uneasy glances, but nodded. They had come too far to back down now. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the oppressive silence was broken by faint rustling sounds. At first, it seemed like nothing more than leaves stirring in the wind, but soon the noises grew louder, sharper. Something was moving in the trees above them. Rachel stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Before anyone could answer, a shadow darted past them, too fast to make out clearly. Then another, and another. The creatures were stalking them, unseen but close. "Stay together," Hayes barked, gripping his weapon tightly. Alex scanned the area, trying to spot any movement, but the jungle's thick canopy made it impossible. Suddenly, one of the shadows dropped from above, a sleek, feline-like creature with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. It landed just feet away, snarling menacingly. Before anyone could react, Two more emerged from the underbrush, circling the group. The humans raised their weapons, but the Deathworlders stepped forward instead. Zira moved quickly, drawing a long blade and positioning herself between the beasts and the humans. Tark and another warrior flanked her, their weapons ready. "Let us handle this," Zira said firmly, her voice steady despite the danger. Reluctantly, Hayes lowered his rifle, signaling for the others to do the same. The fight that followed was brutal and chaotic. The Deathworlders moved with precision, their every strike calculated and deadly. Zira slashed at one creature, driving it back while Tark tackled another, pinning it to the ground before delivering a fatal blow. But there were too many. Just as the team thought the worst was over, a much larger predator burst onto the scene, a hulking beast with armored scales and rows of jagged teeth. It roared, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Kyle stumbled backward, his face pale with terror. "We're dead," he muttered under his breath. "No, we're not," Rachel snapped, grabbing him by the arm. She turned to Alex. "We need to help." Alex hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He pulled out a small explosive charge from his pack and hurled it toward the massive creature. The explosion startled it, giving Zira and the others enough time to regroup. Together, they launched a coordinated attack, striking at its weak points until it finally collapsed with a thunderous roar. When the dust settled, everyone was breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Zira looked at Alex, her glowing eyes filled with something resembling respect. "You fought well," she said simply. Back at camp that night, tensions ran high. Kyle sat apart from the group, staring blankly into the fire. His hands trembled as he clutched a cup of water. "I'm useless," he muttered bitterly. "I should have stayed home." Hayes approached him, sitting down beside him. "Listen to me," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've made mistakes, sure. But so has everyone here. What matters is how you fix them." Kyle shook his head. "I don't think I can fix this." "Yes, you can," Alex interjected, joining the conversation. "You saved Rachel at the river. You didn't give up then, and you won't give up now." For the first time in days, Kyle managed a weak smile. "Thanks," he said quietly. As the fire crackled softly, the humans and Deathworlders shared a rare moment of peace. Despite the dangers ahead, they had proven they could work together. And though none of them knew what tomorrow would bring, they felt a glimmer of hope. For survival, for understanding, and perhaps even for friendship. The final trial came without warning. Varnock gathered the humans and Deathworlders at dawn, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone uneasy. "Last test," he said, his glowing eyes scanning the group. "Together. Kill Shadow." "Shadow?" Alex asked, frowning. The name sent a chill down his spine. Varnock nodded. "Big. Smart. Hunts at night." He pointed toward the deepest part of the jungle, where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. "There. End it." Commander Hayes stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Why us? Why not your warriors?" Varnock's expression didn't change. "You proved strong. Now prove smart." The team exchanged glances, knowing they had no choice but to accept. They prepared quickly, gathering weapons and supplies. Rachel double-checked her gear, her hand steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. Kyle stayed close to Alex, his earlier confidence wavering again. "What if we fail?" he whispered. "We won't," Alex replied firmly, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The journey into the heart of the jungle was silent and tense. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, felt like a threat. As night fell, the darkness closed in around them, suffocating and absolute. Zira led the way, her glowing eyes cutting through the blackness like lanterns. She moved with purpose, her blade always ready. Hours passed, and the group began to feel the strain. Just as exhaustion started to take its toll, a low growl echoed through the trees. It was deep and guttural, sending shivers down their spines. Then, from the shadows, it emerged, a monstrous creature unlike anything they'd ever seen. Its body was covered in dark, mottled scales that blended perfectly with the jungle, and its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. The shadow lunged suddenly, targeting Kyle. He froze, paralyzed with fear, as the creature bore down on him. But before it could strike, Rachel acted. She hurled a flare directly at the beast, blinding it momentarily. The distraction gave Hayes and Tark enough time to attack, their weapons slicing through the air. The battle was chaos. The shadow fought savagely, its movements unpredictable and lightning fast. It swiped at Zira, knocking her to the ground, but Alex rushed to her aid, driving the creature back with a burst of fire from his weapon. Zira rose quickly, her blade flashing as she struck again. Together, they pushed the shadow deeper into the jungle, forcing it into a clearing where they could surround it. Kyle stood at the edge of the fight, trembling. He knew he had to do something, or risk being labeled a coward forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, he grabbed a fallen branch and charged at the shadow, ramming it into the creature's side. The blow stunned it just long enough for Zira to deliver the final strike, her blade piercing its heart. The shadow let out one last, ear-splitting roar before collapsing. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the heavy breathing of those who had fought. Kyle dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had done it. He had faced his fear. Zira approached Kyle, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Brave," she said simply. For the first time, there was warmth in her voice. Back at camp, the Deathworlders held a ceremony to honor the fallen shadow and the humans who had defeated it. Varnock addressed the group, his tone softer than usual. "You strong. You worthy." As the fire burned low, Alex realized they had gained more than survival. They had earned respect, and though their time on Kalos IV was nearing its end, the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. The morning after the final trial was quiet, almost peaceful. The humans packed their gear in silence, their movements slower than usual. They were tired, exhausted, really, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. They had survived Kalos IV and earned the respect of the Deathworlders. It wasn't something they would ever forget. Varnock approached them as they prepared to leave, his towering form casting a long shadow over the camp. In his hands, he held a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Alex without a word. Curious, Alex unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a blade, intricately carved with symbols that glowed faintly. "For you," Varnock said simply. "Remember." Alex nodded, clutching the blade tightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't fully understand what the gift meant, but he knew it was important, a symbol of trust between their species. Rachel stepped forward next, holding out a small recording device. "This is for you," she said, offering it to Zira. "It has stories from Earth, tales of our struggles, our victories. I thought you might like to hear them." Zira took the device, studying it carefully. Her glowing eyes met Rachel's, and for a moment, no words were needed. The exchange spoke volumes about the bond they had formed. Commander Hayes stood nearby, watching the scene unfold. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We'll never forget what we've learned here," he said, addressing Varnock and the other Deathworlders. "Your strength, your resilience, it's something we'll carry with us. Maybe someday we'll meet again." Varnock nodded slowly, his expression unreadable as always. "Perhaps," he said. Then, with a final glance at the humans, he turned and walked back toward the jungle, his warriors following silently behind him. As the team boarded their ship, Kyle lingered by the ramp, looking back at the planet one last time. His face was calm now, the fear that had haunted him for so long finally gone. "I did it," he whispered to himself. "I actually did it." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did more than survive, Kyle. You proved yourself. That's something no one can take away from you." Inside the ship, Alex sat by a window, staring out at the swirling clouds of Kalos IV as they lifted off. He thought about everything they had been through. The trials, the battles, the moments of doubt and triumph. Most of all, he thought about the Deathworlders and how much they had taught him about courage, unity, and perseverance. Commander Hayes joined him, leaning against the wall. "What do you think?" he asked. "Do you think humanity could ever be like them?" Alex smiled faintly. "Maybe not yet, but maybe someday. We got a lot to learn, sure, but we're getting there." As the ship broke through the atmosphere and entered the vastness of space, Rachel joined them, her eyes bright with determination. "One thing's for sure," she said. "If we ever come back here, we'll be ready." The journey home was long, but none of them minded. They had faced death itself on Kalos IV and emerged stronger for it. The Deathworlders' legacy stayed with them, a reminder of what it truly meant to endure. And though they didn't know what the future held, they knew one thing for certain. Every species had its own tales of survival, but few could match the stories of the Deathworlders and the humans who had fought alongside them.